Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear friends, it's a pleasure to be here and pleasure to address such a distinguished audience on a topic which is really very important for my country and for every country presented here. Today you are in the country which was a model country in a bad sense of this word 10 years ago. It was model country, how far corruption can develop and how far corruption can destroy structure and efficiency of the state. 10 years ago, when I was still a student, not student, basically young diplomat, just going through practice in different international organizations, Georgian case was regular case in all those organizations. As an example, what corruption can do with the country, how an efficient state and state services and state institutions can become as a result of corruption. Today that all changed, and that is incredible and enormous transformation through which Georgia went in the last 8 years, and we all are very proud of it. You will probably hear a lot of presentations by Georgians, what we did, how successful these reforms have been, and you have to understand, it's a matter of our proud, because everybody is proud. Everybody who used to live in this country 10 years ago and everybody who lives in this country today is incredibly, enormously proud of this transformation which took place in Georgia. And of course this transformation did not take place itself, and it's a result of very intense effort and fight and struggle against corruption. And the first lesson which we learned after the Rose Revolution is that revolution starts when revolution in classical meaning ends. What it means, I mean, when the government is changed and when people go to their homes and when people leave their flags and slogans aside, that's when the real revolution starts. And that's sometimes a mistake which we see around the world, when people think that change of government is end of revolution and it means all. No, change of government is beginning of the revolution. It's beginning of mental and political transformation of the country. And unless this transformation is successful, unless people see results of this revolution, the revolution can never be considered as successful. So it was the case of the Rose Revolution, and the second day after revolution, the very intense political work, hard work, has started. And the main backbone of that work was fight against corruption and struggle against corruption. It was the main glue behind all Georgian reforms which took place, because it was very clear from the beginning, unless we crack down corruption, nothing positive will happen in this country, because corruption was endemic. Corruption was way of life in Georgia. It's not because we Georgians are by nature corrupt or we are bad guys. No, there are no corrupt nations by nature. There are bad political systems where corruption is style of life, way of living. And this was the case of Georgia. Corruption was something, social. It was part of the daily life. It was part of everything. It was not only part of politics or economic. It was part of social relations among people. And it was a result of the very ugly and distorted economic and political system in which we had to live for 70 years in Soviet Union. So the first objective was to change this perception. The change perception that corruption is not something ordinary, it's not something usual, it's not something which you have to experience and touch on a daily basis, but it's a crime, and crime is always punishable. So the first thing to change was the perception of corruption. It's very curious that in former times, corruption was not seen as something negative in Georgia. And again, it's a result of the Soviet system, because how the Soviet system was, in the conditions of planned Soviet economy, when a factory was built in Georgia, for the manager or director of that factory, it was very natural to go to Moscow, to take few boxes of Georgian brandy or cognac or vodka, to pay this bribe to some Russian bureaucrat sitting in Kremlin, and to bring back millions of rubles from the Soviet budget. So basically it was not that bad, You could earn millions of rubles from Soviet budget based on one simple bribe. So in Georgian perception, corruption was not that bad, and sometimes it was even useful. And that was, again, as I say, the result of the ugly system in which country used to live during the Soviet days. So the first challenge was how to change this perception and how to show that corruption is not something ordinary, it's not something useful, but it's a crime and it's punishable. So here I come to your specific profile, which is punishment of those who are involved in corruption. And the first lesson learned here was that fight against corruption starts from the top. And unless there is will in the top political echelon to fight against corruption, nothing will happen. Because corruption is it's like a pyramid. And if the will does not come from the top, it will never emerge on the bottom. Because you are prosecutors here. I can hardly imagine a prosecutor which will be able to arrest minister or member of parliament unless he or she knows that there is a strong political will on the top to do so. And this was the case in Georgia. We never had in the past political will to fight against corruption. So there was no single case of somebody important being arrested for corruption. We had no minister, no member of parliament, no deputy minister. Nobody was ever arrested for corruption, again because of the lack of political will on the top level. So the first thing was to demonstrate clearly that there is a political will on the top level. And that enabled this fight against corruption, that enabled punishing those who were involved in corruption, and that was a very strong signal. We had to arrest 6 members of parliament in previous parliament because of corruptional charges, and they all had parliamentary immunity. And it's something very, very difficult when you, as a member of parliament, have to vote against your colleague, against somebody who sits next to you in the hall. And it's not easy. It's not easy. It doesn't happen in many parliaments. In our parliament in previous term, it happened 6 times when we voted for the abolishment of immunity of those MPs, and they have been arrested because of different corruptional charges. And that is the political will. Without this political will, without this overwhelming understanding on the top level, top political level, that corruption should be punished, without it, I don't think that any real changes may take place. The other part of it is structural changes, because only punishment, of course, is never important. That's important part of the story to demonstrate that whoever is guilty, he or she will be punished, and there is supremacy of law, and there is no impunity based on position. It's very important. But if you do not create proper system, only punishment never helps. So another step and second very important lesson was to create the conditions under which the system itself minimizes the chances of corruptional deals. What we did for that, Georgia was not exception from many of the post-Soviet countries. Like if a businessman wanted to take a single license, he had to go to 10 different windows, to 10 different bureaucrats, and then every bureaucrat was a boss, and then this businessman had to beg every single bureaucrat out of these 10, please do that favor for me, please. And then at the end, the easy way to get this license was to pay a bribe and to take it eventually. So we decided to change the system. And we changed the entire philosophy of the state service behind. So what we have today is a single window, so-called single stop principle. When there are no 10 different bureaucrats, there is one window, one bureaucrat, and the person, the businessman, just ordinary citizen, whenever he or she wants something, goes to this single window, and he does not have to go to anybody else. So it's one stop. And the second very important change, silence is consent principle. So if you submit an application for a license or permission here, and you do not get response in 3 days' time, this is considered as positive response. So nobody has to beg, public servants or bureaucrats, please, I'm in a hurry, so could you please give me response? And then there is no bureaucrat able to say, well, come to me next week, and then come to me the week after, and then months after. So this was the typical way to bribe. So it simply does not exist anymore. If you have to go to one window, and if you are supposed to get a response in 3 days because otherwise you have the positive response, you have simply no motivation to pay the bribe. So together with punishment, also such changes in the system were very important, was second very important element by which we minimize this risk of corruptional deals. So what are the results? I mean, there have been some other steps as well, and I mentioned the political will on the top, on the level of top leadership. That was very important, not only in terms of punishment, but also in terms of creating positive model. By punishing those who are part of corruption, you basically establish the negative model that corruption is bad. But you have to also, as a government, demonstrate what is good. and establish a positive model. And here again, the political will is very important. And I can mention one example. It's a well-known story of Georgian traffic police, which was very similar to many of those in your countries. But Georgian traffic police, it was very prominent in a sense that it was the most corrupt structure in the country, and driving through Georgia was about paying bribes in every 200 meters to the road traffic policemen, without any reason, of course, but the very fact that traffic policeman was in the street was the good reason to ask a bribe from you, because the motivation was very simple. Well, I'm standing here, I'm a policeman, and you don't want to give me even 1 or 2 laris. Then why am I standing here in the street? So this was the simple reason to pay. So when we learned this case, it was virtually impossible to transform the structure. It was so corrupt. It was unchangeable. So the decision was to dismiss the structure and to create the new one. And we had to dismiss 1,500 policemen in one day, which for a small country like this looks like a political suicide. But after revolution, usually governments enjoy very high credit of support. And after revolution, things like that are doable. In any other condition, it would be very, very hard to do, to dismiss 15,000 people one day. And policemen, not ordinary people. But we did it, and then we started creation of the new structure. And here I come to this positive example. What I remember myself, the president was attending personally the entry exams to this new police. And we tried to attract all these young people and demonstrate that working in police is good. It's no longer old, corrupt, discredited police, but we are creating something new, something very important for this country. And personal presence of president, personal presence of prime minister at those entry exams, personal presence of minister, of course, but also members of parliament, was a clear message that this is something very important for this country. And by entering this new police structure, you young people are doing very important job for this country. And I remember one case, president was sitting there, and I was there. I was those days chairman of European Committee in the Parliament, and next to me was chairman of Legal Affairs Committee of the Parliament. And one of these young guys came, and president interviewed him, and he asked, well, you see these 2 members of Parliament, 2 chairmen of committees here, and what happens if you stop the car, and you see that the chairman of Legal Affairs Committee of the Parliament is driving the car, and the second gentleman is sitting next to him? What will be your reaction? And they break the rules, and you stop the car and you see them there. What will be your reaction? And the guy somehow hesitated to respond. And the president said, no, it's a wrong response, so you cannot enter the structure. And then he called second guy and asked him the same question. And the guy said, they will pay the fine as if they are ordinary citizens, because it does not matter who they are. And then the president said, yes, this is the right response. And it was all televised. And it was the way to give a positive image and positive perception to all these guys and to the country what it means. Because for that young man, who was entering this new police structure, the response from president that, yes, if you stop the car and see members of parliament there driving or doing something wrongly, they are for you ordinary citizens, and everybody is equal before the law. For that young man, that will be a lesson, and that probably was a lesson which he will remember for the rest of his career and his life. And we did a lot of things like that to promote this positive perception that, being uncorrupt, serving to the law, serving to the state is something positive. So that changed entire perception, because 10 years ago, being a prosecutor in this country or being a policeman in this country, it was never seen as something good. It was seen as just a way to earn money. Today, being a policeman or being a prosecutor is a matter of pride. It's no longer a matter of money. Of course, salaries are much higher than it used to be. But now it's a matter of perception and pride that you are on the right side and you are doing right things. So in fighting against corruption, it's very important to draw this line where the right things start. And when you motivate people to stand on the right side and do right things, that's the big motivation which help a lot of people, to do their job much better than in other circumstances. So basically, these were the lessons which we learned. Drawing the line, punishing those who are on the wrong side, promoting those and encouraging those who are on the right side, and creating conditions under which the risk of corruption is minimized. Sometimes we are criticized that we simplified our economic system too much. Yes, we canceled 80% of our licenses and permits, but that was absolutely, I'm still convinced, we did it 6 years ago, but I'm still convinced it was absolutely important for cracking down corruption. Because as I said, by minimizing these procedures, by minimizing state intervention into economy, we minimize the risk of corruption, risk of corruptional deals. We minimize the motivation for the people to pay and to take bribes. And that was the only step ahead. And if you ask Georgians today, and traditionally we are very, very vibrant and energetic society, and there are two national sports in Georgia, I mean, football and politics. I cannot say that we are very good in either of them, but at least it's very popular. So if you ask people today how do they like the reforms or how do they like government, you may hear criticism on a lot of things. Some people do not like, color of buildings which we repair. Some people may not like the shape of statues which we build. Some people may not like the extent of liberalism which we have in economy. But there is at least one thing which everybody appreciates and likes, and that's the results achieved in fight against corruption. This is something which is very broadly appreciated, which is something which is very broadly seen, and if one asks me what is the result on which everybody agrees that this government did something good for this country, I believe we did a lot of good things for this country. But if one conducts the public survey, I believe the number one issue will be the fact that we tackled down corruption and we destroyed corruption in this country. And it's not just statement. Like by all our polls, police, which had 2-3% of trust, as I said, 10 years ago, being a policeman was not seen as something good and standing on the right side. And police had 2 or 3% of public confidence, public trust. Today, by all polls, police has 86-87% of public confidence. And that's this result of this incredible change which took place in the country. 10 years ago, 97% of people would say you that they had to pay a bribe for service or for utility. Today, by polls, and I'm talking about international polls, I'm talking about Transparency International's Global Corruption Barometer survey, which happens in every country. So by that survey, today, 97% of Georgian population says that they did not have to pay a bribe in last year for anything. And this is not last year, but it was the same result previous year and same result the year before. So we have stable 4 or 5 years in which about 97% of Georgian population says that they did not have a touch with corruption, they did not have to pay a bribe. And that is, tremendous transformation from the country, which 10 years ago started, as a model country for corruption and inefficiency of the state institutions. So here I come to the point where I started, and I hope it will be interesting for you to listen Georgian presentations, how we did it. And again, please forgive Georgian speakers if they are too proud of their reforms, because again, knowing Georgia 10 years ago and knowing Georgia today, makes a lot of difference. And people who made this difference are, of course, proud that they did it. So forgive Georgians if they are proud of these reforms. And it will be certainly very interesting for us also to hear, and for Georgian side to listen to your presentations and to hear how you, regional countries around us, countries who face a lot of similar problems, also address these similar problems and how you address these challenges in your country. So I wish you a fruitful meeting, I wish you a fruitful conference, and I hope that at the end, when you return back to your countries, you will remember this gathering as something helpful, which was good and which helped you in continuation of your practical work. So I wish you a nice and fruitful conference. And I wish you also, Georgia is not only about conferences or reforms, and after reforms, Georgia is even better than it was before reforms. So I hope you have a chance to familiarize yourself with this country, with this city, with Georgian culture, with different Georgian habits which are still popular and which many of our neighbors still remember. So I hope you will have time for that as well, and you will have a opportunity to see corruption-free Georgia with your own eyes, not only from this hall, but also in many other destinations. So I wish you very fruitful work, and again, it was a pleasure to be here, and I think the very fact that this conference takes place in Georgia is very, very important for us. So good luck and all the best. Thank you.